Hello, welcome to TackleMaking.com. Today we're going to talk a little bit about through-wire construction. Through-wire construction is a lure making technique for attaching a line tie and a tail hook with one solid piece of wire. It's usually used when you're building lures for saltwater species or larger freshwater species, but some lure makers actually use it for smaller lures as well, like bass baits and some of the panfish baits. The way that it works, or the way that I guess one of the smaller lures normally works, is they'll just take a screw here, they'll put a little bit of epoxy on it, they'll drill a hole in, screw in their screw, and that's essentially it. That's the line tie. They'll do the same thing in the back, where they'll take a screw, put some epoxy on it, a little pilot hole, screw it in, and that's their connection. The problem is that on larger fish, can actually use the hook as a lever to pop that out. So it's not as strong as through wire construction, and the screw approach is something that you probably don't want to use for any baits that are going to be used for larger fish. The through wire is a lot stronger and is a better approach. So with through wire construction, what you do is actually drill a hole through where you want your line tie to be, through the bait, and have it come out where your tail hook is going to be. So you have one hole that goes straight through the lure from the tail hook and comes out at the line tie. What you're then going to do is take one solid piece of wire, run it through the lure, have it come out at the line tie, and you're going to make a bend at the front for your line tie, put on a hook in the back, put another bend in, and use that to hold on your hook. So what you're going to want to do when you're building this is when you drill the hole, you want to make sure that the diameter of the hole is about the same as the diameter of your wire. You don't want to have too much gap in there, because that'll allow some play, which eventually could weaken the wire. So you want to have the diameter of the width of the wire to be the same as the kind of the width of that hole that you drill through your lure. So when you're doing this, you drill your hole, and then you take a piece of wire and run it in the back and out the front. You then make a loop in that, twist it off, trim off the excess so that you have your eye at the front. You then go back to the back of the bait, grab the rest of the wire, and tug on it so that it's firmly pulling the line tie against the lure at the front, and so that you have a firm connection at the back. You're then going to put your hook over the wire, put a little bend in it, and tie it off at the back, so that you have your hook looped on the back and a loop in the front for the line tie. And that's basic through wire construction. What most people want to do, though, is add another hook in the belly of the bait. And you use through wire construction for that as well. So the way that works, you follow the same process that you followed before. You drill your hole through, but instead of stopping there, you actually take your drill out, you drill in back through the eye hole, through the bottom, and come out in the belly where you want your belly hook to be. So you end up with one hole drilled from the tail through the bait coming out at the line tie, and another hole going in the line tie and coming out where your belly hook will be. You then take the wire the same way you did before, run it through the bait, put your loop in it, but instead of stopping there, you actually drive the wire. Once you make your loop, you push the wire back in the hole and have it come out the bottom. So you have wire that goes in the back, comes through the bait, makes a loop, comes out the bottom. You then take that loop and you twist it off to create your line tie. You do the same thing you did before. You go to the back of the bait, pull it tight, put your hook on, put your loop there, twist it off, trim off the excess, come to the front. Now you pull on the bottom wire so that that's firm, run your hook over that, put the loop in it, twist it off, trim off the excess. And now you have one solid wire that goes from the tail hook up to the line tie, back through the bait, and connects to the belly hook. It's a really strong connection so that all the force of the fighting fish is actually managed by the wire inside the bait instead of by some weaker screw points. So to give you another example of this, I actually have a smaller lure that we can run through the process on. So I've already drilled my holes here, but essentially I want my line tie to be right here in the front. I want my tail hook to be dead center in the back, and I also want to have a belly hook here in the bottom. So what I did is I drilled a hole through from the back and out the front where I want my line tie to be. I then took my drill, put it back in, and drilled straight down and came out the bottom here. So I have a hole that goes through this way, and then I have a connecting hole that goes from there out the back. So what I want to do then is I want to take my wire. This wire is a little bit smaller, just it's easier to demonstrate with, but normally it would be about the same diameter as the hole I drilled. But I want to take my wire, go in the back, push it through so that it comes out the front. Now what I'll do is put a bend in that wire and push it back into the bait straight down so that it comes out the bottom, like that. And then what I'll do is I'll pull on my wires a little bit to get that loop at the front a little smaller and up snug against the bait, and then I'll twist that off to make my line tie. Now what I'll do is I'll come to the back of the bait, I'll pull that tight, I'll make my loop here. At this point I would probably slide a hook up over the wire into that loop, and then I'll twist it off. I do the same thing at the bottom. I slide my hook over the wire, I make my loop, twist it off, and then I go back around and I trim off any excess wire. And that's how you do through wire construction of a fishing lure. Now the other benefit of this is that it actually becomes a very handy tool for painting the lures. And a lot of new lure makers have the common question of how do you hold a bait while you're painting it? And if you're using through wire construction, it's actually really easy to hold a lure while you're painting. So what you do is you drill your holes with the bare bait, with the unpainted bait. You then take your wire and start the through wire construction. Push it through so that it comes out the front, twist it back over, and then pull it back snug. So the good thing is I now have a little holder for my lure. So if I want to do painting, if I'm using an airbrush, I can actually hold on to this wire, use my airbrush gun to paint it. If I'm doing scales, I can put a little netting over it, spray paint it, and rotate it to get the scales all the way around. It's really good for that. Or if I'm not using spray paint or an airbrush, and I'm using a dipping process, which is usually used for base coats, this is really handy for that as well. Where I would have a cup of paint, and I would take my lure, and I would dip it into the paint a few times, like that. And the good thing is after I've dipped it, or after I've sprayed it, I can then take the wire at the top, put a little bend in it, and hang it to dry. It's really good for that. So that's through wire construction. The last piece of information about this is when you're done with that, when you've done all of your painting, you've put on your hooks, you've put all your bends in your wire, you've trimmed it off, you need to do one last step to make it watertight. And what you're going to want to do there is get some epoxy. Some 2-ton epoxy usually works well. You can get it at pretty much any local department store or hardware store. Mix up a little dab of it, take a toothpick, put it in there, and then use your toothpick to apply that epoxy to all of your holes. Apply the epoxy, brush off the excess, and you'll end up with a really good looking lure with a strong through wire construction where the hooks are well connected, and there's very little risk of actually losing a fish once you hook it. I hope that helps. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go to tacklemaking.com. Post your questions. I'll try my hardest to answer them, but if I can't, I'm sure one of the other members in the community will. Thank you very much.